I'm here to talk about this. This is a chest X-ray showing a retained guide wire, a clear indication that a medical error has occurred. We have the only patented solution for preventing the retention of these guide wires, along with their associated costs and complications. I'll talk about the market, which is large and growing. I'll talk about the problem, which is widespread, involves serious morbidity and even mortality. The solution, which is proprietary, is the only effective solution and is intuitive to use. Additionally, it's simple and inexpensive to manufacture, will yield a high margin, and the ability to capture market share. The market is large and growing. Currently, a $1.28 billion market in North America for central catheters, projected to grow to $1.8 billion by 2030. The global market is about 3 times that. And it's a big problem. It actually affects over 1,500 patients every year. And based on a Harvard Foundation study, it's costing hospitals and physicians about $830 million of additional cost every year. It's so significant that in 2018, the Joint Commission declared retained guide wires a never event. Now, what does that declaration mean? It means that by necessity, any solution will be eligible for FDA fast tracking. It imposes an additional fine per incident. And importantly, it extends the culpability beyond just the operator to now also include the hospitals and hospital systems in which they occur. As a little background, Dr. Sven Selzinger developed this technique about 70 years ago of basically advancing a catheter over a flexible guide wire and into a blood vessel. The common denominator where this error occurs is a misstep when the catheter is advanced over the guide wire.
In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how this occurs clinically. As in the diagram, the first step of the Selzinger technique involves advancing a needle while aspirating on a syringe until I get the return of blood, indicating the proper placement of the needle tip within a vessel, at which point I remove the syringe and advance a guide wire through the needle and into the vessel. The needle is then removed, leaving a guide wire in place. Now a catheter is advanced over the guide wire and into the patient. The misstep occurs because the guide wire does not protrude through the proximal end of the catheter before it is advanced into the vessel. The reasons that this occur in each instance are multifactorial, and I will allude to some of those reasons in the presentation.
So that was the how this error occurs. The why, though, is much more complicated. These large catheters are usually placed when the time is critical, the patients are unstable, we need to infuse fluids and blood rapidly, the setting is crowded and busy. The whole time, the same physician has to maintain that patient's vital signs, including their blood pressure and oxygenation. And if there's a perturbation, they have to administer rapid-acting medications, all the while wearing personal protective equipment and maintaining a sterile field. Yes, it's an operator error, it's an operator problem, but it needed a system solution. I'm Rhodel Dacanay. I'm in my 17th year of private practice as an anesthesiologist at an inner-city level 1 trauma center. Before that, I was an academic anesthesiologist. I have an engineering background and am represented by Venable's legal team. The solution is a removable internal safety sheath. It will have integrated features that will prevent the unwanted migration of guide wires into a patient's body. Simple, elegant. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office agreed that it was novel, functional, and non-obvious. Those things will be borne out a little bit better in this video.
In this next video clip, I will demonstrate the only effective method of preventing the migration and inadvertent retention of a guide wire into a patient. The steps are the same as originally described by Dr. Selzinger and illustrated in the diagram. The lumen of the vessel is accessed with a seeker or thin-walled needle, and proper placement is confirmed by the return of blood into the syringe. A guide wire is then inserted through the needle, and the needle is removed. This leaves a guide wire within the vessel. Now, with a removable safety sheath within the catheter, even minimum insertion of the guide wire into the sheath. Please note that there is no guide wire protruding through the proximal portion of the catheter. If at this point the misstep occurs and everything is advanced into the patient, the guide wire will not be lost. The misstep is identified, and in fact it has to be identified because there's no way to attach a syringe or fluid administration tubing to the catheter while the safety device is in place. At this point, the misstep is identified and the safety device is removed, and the guide wire will be attached to it. So despite a misstep, the guide wire is removed along with the safety sheath, and the remaining catheter is completely intact and usable. The safety device is not obtrusive. It can come preloaded in the catheter. It is intuitive because it must be removed before the catheter can be used, and it's exactly the same step as we would always carry out in the Seldinger technique of removing the guide wire. The safety device and the guide wire are simply removed in the same step.
So that's on the clinical side, and the cost to our patients is clear and oftentimes very large. Has about a 5% mortality rate when it occurs and a 10% serious morbidity rate. On the other side, we place about 5 million of these every year in the United States alone. 90% of these had gone unreported because it's a clear error on the physician side. However, Vanucci et al. Did a large retrospective study and determined the actual incidence is about 1 in every 3,250 placements. So it affects about 1,540 patients every year. The Harvard Foundation did a large study to determine the cost for the hospitals and physicians for retained foreign bodies, including retained guide wires. Their average cost was $473,000 per incident. If serious morbidity or mortality occurs, that average goes to $2 million. The JCO fine that's now added to that averages $60,000 per incident. It adds up to a large number, about $830 million of extra costs to physicians and hospitals that are just kind of a hidden cost of doing business. Or per catheter, about $166. So if you spread that over all the stakeholders at a conservative markup of $75, a catheter company would yield $375 million in additional revenue, while still saving hospitals and physicians almost $500 million every year. My specialty is a prime example that patience is not always a virtue. This is a much needed safety device, and it's not for the patient, investor, or company. It is by necessity eligible for FDA fast tracking. It is by design straightforward and inexpensive to manufacture. It is by demand logical to market. The future will be the progressive company that seizes the opportunity to capture this $1.28 billion market while adding $375 million of revenue, realizing significant R&D savings, because we all have these think tanks that are paid and rarely produce, I think, something that will benefit patients as much as this. The whole time, you're saving hospital systems and physicians an extra $455 million a year, and those are 2013 dollars. Thank you.